Hey there, welcome back. We're going to pick up where we left off last time and jump right into modeling the rear brake. First things first, let's bring up the gizmo and pick the polycube from the gear. Hit the delete loops button and unmask the bottom face. Now just move it up and scale it a bit in the x-axis. We're going to run a dynamesh utility with the blur set to 0 and the poly count set to 1 million. Turn on symmetry in the x-axis and then switch over to your clip curve brush. Once you've given the sides a good clipping, change over to the clipped circle center brush. Then press Ctrl, Shift, and Alt together to create a nice arc at the bottom. Let's show the polyframe and you'll see it's flattened all the faces to match the clip brushes. So it's always a good habit of running a dynamesh after every clip operation. Switch to the top view and bring back the clip curve brush. Turn on symmetry in both the X and Z axis. Now snap to the front view, mask the model, and disable symmetry for the Z axis. Go ahead and hit W to bring up the gizmo. From the gear, bring in a cylinder 3D. Adjust the scale and position until it's just right. Unmask by control dragging on the canvas. Then control and drag on the canvas again to dynamesh. Next up, unmask those corners and use the clip curve with the gradient facing downwards. Let's clear the mask, run a dynamesh, and clip away any excess. Let's center the gizmo with local symmetry on and mirror and weld in the x-axis. Snap to the side view and let's add a mask. Control click on the canvas to invert the mask, then clip the unmasked geo. Clear the mask and then run a dynamesh. Snap to the side view and mask again. This time, let's make sure there's no masking on the flat surface. Now snap to the front and unmask that arc we just created earlier. Invert the mask and clip the unmasked geo. Remember to make sure the gradient faces the mesh. Let's bring back our trusty gizmo and alt-click on the flat surface. Scale it along the y-axis or whichever axis is facing you on the screen. Now we can clear the mask and run a dynamesh. Switch back to the clip circle center brush and press Ctrl, Shift, and Alt to create an arc on the sides. Control drag on the canvas for another dynamesh. With the clip curve brush, we're going to try and round out the sides a bit more. Same thing underneath. Let's run a dynamesh to clean up the geo. Using the clip circle center brush, we're going to try to restore some of what we lost from clipping the sides. Grab the planer brush to flatten the surface. Same with the back. After using the planer brush, run a dynamesh. Alright, let's mask out the sides and flatten them with our gizmo. Clip any excess geo that's hanging about. Turn on symmetry in the X and Z axis, then start masking a rectangle. From there, switch to the Mask Perfect Circle brush to add to the rectangle mask. You can use the mask pen to fill in any gaps. Invert the mask, snap to the top-down view, and clip back the unmasked geo. As always, clear the mask and run a dynamesh. To smooth out those jagged edges, a gentle polish with an open circle should do the trick. If you want to add some tiny holes, I recommend using the displace brush with a circle alpha. I thought we'd start off with the planer brush just to see how far we get. Unmask the flat plane, then clip it back for a quick cleanup. Smooth those edges and run a quick polish. Let's use the Mask Perfect Circle again. Extend the mask using the mask curve. Then press Ctrl and Alt to unmask. Use the mask pen to add the triangle top. For me, I don't mind using multiple masking brushes to achieve the shape I need, whatever does the job best. Snap to the side view and mask out the middle. Next, unmask the top and use the mask pen to clean up any overspill. Let's move the unmasked geo inwards with the gizmo. Mask up to the point where the angle changes. Then add a mask circle. Finish off the mask by using the mask curve. Bring up the gizmo to move the unmasked geo back. Mask the top part of the brake. And add a slightly larger mask circle. Mask the middle and push it inward slightly with the gizmo. Clear the mask and run a dynamesh. Use the polish slider to clean up any choppiness. We can use the planer brush to help fill in any gaps. Select the clip curve brush and move the camera to the side view. Mask the upper part of the triangle shape and use the clip curve brush to create the angle change. Mask the flat surface and use the gizmo to clear up any overlapping caused by the clipping. Let's clear the mask and, you guessed it, run a dynamesh. For a bit of a cleanup, get out our planer brush. We can use the planer rect brush to set a new depth, then switch back to the planer brush to finish it off. I'm not really worried about any waviness in the mesh. We can always tidy that up during retopo. Now let's mask the model and bring back the gizmo. From the gear, select Cylinder 3D. Scale it in the Z-axis. Lower it slightly. Then scale it in the X-axis so it doesn't break through the lower extrusion. Clear the mask and run a dynamesh to finish up. Alright, let's move on to creating the logo on the front. We're going to roll out our Mask Perfect Circle brush to create our outer and inner lines. To finish off the shape, we're going to switch to the Mask Pen brush. Sometimes what seems like a complex task can be tackled easily using the old trustworthy ZBrush features. Nothing too fancy needed here. Invert the mask and move it out with the gizmo. Clear the mask, dynamesh, and then give it a little polish with an open circle. Next up, we're going to work on the rear brake brace. Mask the model and bring the gizmo back. From the gear, choose the polycube. Invert the mask and split unmasked points. Now let's switch to solo mode and hit delete loops. This one is going to be a pretty easy one to knock out. Scale it up, position it, add some edge loops, and then move the points into place. Hit QC30, scale it into Z-axis, and set the crease level to 3. From the Gizmo's gear, let's select the cylinder 3D. Set the H divides to 32 and the inner radius to about 0.4. Add an edge loop to the cylinder's outer surface. Next, Q-mesh the poly loop. Add another edge loop, and when you Q-mesh that poly loop, hold down the shift to activate the move operation. Press group by normals and delete the inner edge loop. Q-mesh the polygroup island while holding down the control key to separate it into a new island. Q-mesh again to add some thickness. Now we can add a single edge loop. Perform a Q-mesh flat island while holding shift to move the flat island. You could also mask the top polys and move them with the gizmo. Do a Q-mesh poly loop, again holding shift. Unmask the top polys and tweak them with the gizmo. Press QC50 and throw in a couple edge loops using insert multiple edge loops. Let's position the edge loops to create a softer fall off. Go ahead and move that edge loop around and manually adjust the fall off using the gizmo. Then crease the top edge loop. It's time to add in edge loops to get rid of these rectangle faces. To finish it off, let's set the crease level to 3. Like we've done before, mask the model, and from the Gizmo's gear, let's bring in a cylinder 3D. Go ahead and scale it up and turn off dynamic. Set the inner radius to 0.32. Invert the mask and split unmasked points. Then scale it in the Z-axis. We'll alt tag the two faces to punch them through. Then delete the larger island. Add in a few edge loops and press QC50. Accept the dynamic subdivisions and delete the lower subdivisions. Next, dynamesh the model, setting the blur to 0 and cranking up the polygon count to 1 million. Turn off line and the polyframe button, we don't want any distractions. Now it's time to select the knife curve brush and start cutting in the shape. One of the cool things about the knife brush is it plays nicely with symmetry. Center the gizmo and with local symmetry on, mirror and weld in the x-axis. Let's switch gears to the Slice Curve brush to set up our polygroups. We'll work on half the model and mirror and weld the other half. Select the middle polygroup and invert the selection. Press Ctrl W to group visible. Select the middle polygroup again and press Auto Groups. Go ahead and duplicate the subtool. Select the middle polygroup and delete Hidden. Now click on the Extrude button from Ryan's Tools. With the gizmo, Control-click on the polygroup to unmask it, then give it some thickness. Clear the mask and run Polish by Features a couple times to clean up the extrusion. Dynamesh it again to add some more polys in the middle. Press Group as Dynamesh Sub to assign a white polygroup to the mesh. This lets ZBrush know that this is a subtractive mesh. The Group as Dynamesh Sub option is located in the tool palette under the Polygroup subpalette. It's a neat little trick to use when you hide other meshes in the same subtool and you want to turn the visible mesh into a subtractive mesh. Finally, we can merge the subtools down and run a Dynamesh to create the whole. Now we're going to try a slightly less conventional approach to retopology. Grab our Mesh Fusion brush and select the 4 sides IMM. Click and drag on key places of the mesh that will serve as connecting points. Next, select the planes and split Hidden. Switch to the Move brush and make sure the gizmo is in the center of the mesh with local symmetry turned on. At this stage, we can start matching these points with the target geometry. Press Project All to ensure they snap to the surface. Now let's grab the Z-Modeler brush and start snapping points together and extruding edges. We can turn the line back on in the Polyframe button. This is likely not the way you were taught how to retopo, but it works for me in certain scenarios. We can get rid of that one edge loop and mask the top. This way we can move it back to get that angle change. Add in some edge loops and reposition the points with the Move Infinite Depth brush. Let's change to the point slide action in the Z-Modeler brush to ensure we don't change the angle while we're repositioning these points. Navigate to the Array Mesh tab and activate the Array Mesh. Select Lock Position, Lock Size, and Transpose. Set the repeat to 5. For the rotation, set the Z amount to 360. Bring up the gizmo and press Y to switch to the transpose line. Move the transpose line pivot point for the array mesh. Once it's lined up, we can hit Make Mesh to lock it in. Let's activate Dynamic to see where the points are not welded, and click Weld Points with the weld distance set to 5. Now Alt-tag these faces to change the polygroup. Then do a Inset Polygroup All. Switch to the Move Infinite Depth Brush. Delete the outside edge loop. Then we can Q-mesh all polygons to give it some thickness. Press Flip, and then Q-mesh Polygroup All. Select Transpose Polyloop and try to match the slope of the model. Turn on Dynamic and hit Crease PG. Let's make some creasing adjustments with the ZModeler brush set to Crease Edge Loop Partial. There are a few edges we need to adjust, but it will get done gradually. Set the crease level to 3. Grab the Move Infinite Depth brush again and make a few more tweaks to the model. Now it's time to add some supporting edge loops to control how sharp the plane changes. Let's turn on the visibility of the other subtools and merge them down. But before you do this, make sure each subtool is a single polygroup. Now let's return to the working tool and alt-click on the subtool you want to insert it under. Turn off dynamic and start positioning and scaling the model into place. Disabling dynamic will help out with the scaling and rotating process. Lastly, select and adjust the axle to get a better fit. It's all about tweaking and fine-tuning at this stage.